and industry's been seeking a wider entry point, not just looking at capital market issuance, into sustainable and responsible practices. But I would say, and I sit on the Board of Trustees of the RFI Foundation, which is an industry think tank for such engagement, and I've worked with various different forums. Awareness has been lacking to an extent. And, you know, Claire was talking already about the discussions that are going on at global level about SRI and ESG and formulating propositions. If we are looking at an industry that sometimes challenges itself about its own levels of standardisation and how it determines Sharia compliance and how many standards we have for Sukuk issuance, when we start to shake that up and talk about E's and S's and G's as well, it becomes quite complicated. So what does it all mean? Let's look at some of the organisations that might be relevant. PRI, there was some discussion about that. DDCAP was one of the first Islamic financial signatories to PRI. We're an intermediary. We're a UK firm. We work in the Islamic financial space. And as Rafi said, there's just a handful of OIC country firms who are represented as signatories on PRI. And actually, they're diminishing to an extent. And why is that? PRI has suddenly gone from voluntary to mandatory reporting. And as a mandatory reporter, and my colleague Jennifer, who heads the SRA at DDCAP, is here today and she can tell you more about it. It has been extremely difficult, even for us, as an international financial sector firm to report back. So I think it's extremely challenging. And actually, as an intermediary working in the Islamic financial space with its weighting to banking, that's been complicated as well. I'm enthused by the new PRB. What I would say, cautionary note, not everybody's CIMB and Gatehouse, and I think some of our banks will be challenged actually to go through those processes. They're going to need guidance. Who is going to guide them? Also for Islamic finance, because of the construction of our contracts, the way in which the industry works, there's a lot of intermediation that happens in the banking space. When I look at PRB, there doesn't seem to be an immediately eligible category for intermediary firms in the same way that PRI has. So that's maybe something that the signatories can address. So finally, looking at the engagement and how Islamic banks perhaps find a wider entry point. You know, I have to touch very briefly on the SDGs. And the General Council for Islamic Banks and Financial Institutions, SIBAFI, focused its 2019 Global Islamic Bankers Survey on social and development issues. And forgive me if I read a little bit from SIBAFI, because it is really illuminating. Part of this report was focused on the SDGs. Islamic banks were asked to rank through a series of questions the importance to them of each of the 17 goals. And this is illustrative as well. We're looking at the goals themselves, but as a firm that is supportive of delivery against the goals, you know, DDCAP is challenged again in looking at what those objectives are within each one of the goals. So, you know, when we're just looking at what the goals themselves mean, we've got a bit of curve catch up to do. So they're looking at the goals as part of their strategic business development and in terms of importance in enabling them to deliver against the objectives of Sharia. The focus was restricted, so it just looked at banking, forget capital markets, and I've already discussed that. But as a report, I think it gave one of the most expansive illustrations of how SIBAFI members, an important group of Islamic banks, understand the SDGs and how they're working out their individual and collective roles in developing their understanding and their delivery against the objectives. So 106 banks, 33 countries. The global outcome showed that goals related to economic growth and development are most important. And thereafter, individual goals such as 4, quality education, and 1, no poverty. At the bottom were goals linked to climate, natural environment, and biodiversity. Now, there's a sort of global approach that SIBAFI took, and then it broke the responses down into regions. And those responses, biodiversity and environmental considerations, were at the bottom in virtually every one of the regions, even though the responses were otherwise quite diverse and reflected regional preoccupations. So just in conclusion here, SIBAFI felt that Islamic banks are well attuned to the objectives of Sharia and also to those of the SDGs. But many of them right now are seeing them as just another pillar of compliance. And they're relevant to funds that might be allocated to charitable giving or to corporate social responsibility. And, you know, we're moving on from that. Currently, that missing element is the full integration of the SDGs within the overarching objectives of Sharia within the overall business and activities of the banks. Certain banks are targeting that integration, great, but it brings me back to the wider global perspective that I was just talking about with, you know, global signatories to PRI and maybe to PRB. Challenged enough as it is, you know, if we are really going to put some thought around this and push our overweighted banking sector into delivering against the objectives, we really have to give some critical thought now about how that guidance is going to be provided and how they're going to be supported. Otherwise, I think it's going to be a long catch-up process.